I did not see Israeli remote vasectomies as the story I would start with today, but Israel has just sterilized between 1,200 and 1,500 terrorists. Sadly, some of the Hezbollah terrorists died during the vasectomy procedures that Israel was doing, exploding testicles across Lebanon today. Israel, somehow, this is actually Tom Clancy level stuff. The Israeli Secret Service, the Mossad, Shin Bet, one of them, discovered how to trigger the pagers of Hezbollah terrorists to explode. And across Lebanon today, in the last 2 hours, pagers have been exploding. They even got the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. Now, why is this important? So, children, back when your parents were young, there was something called a pager. They didn't have cell phones. And some parents would buy their children pagers, and you could dial a phone number, and this little bitty device would go beep, 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 and you could look and see, it's a particular phone number that I know calling. In some cases, you could even generate small text messages, call mom, or for doctors, come to the hospital. But more particularly, drug dealers. Drug dealers loved the pagers. And you could page your drug dealer, and they would come give you drugs. Into the 90s and then into the 2000s, cell phones took off. And doctors slowly gave up the pagers, as did moms and dads, the drug dealers and the terrorists. They've kept the pagers. Now, for those of you who don't know, the pager is a little device. And you tend to clip it to your belt or put it in your pocket, your front pocket. Your front pocket. Right there with your keys, and next to, well, if you're a guy, that. And today, Israel experimented in revolutionary new vasectomy technology. The pagers of Hezbollah terrorists went boom. So here's what happens. You get the list of numbers for the pagers of the terrorists. Now, how do you get the list of numbers for the pagers? This isn't hard. Do you really think that these 1,200 individuals are paying their pager bill? No. Hezbollah is paying the bill for all the pagers. You join Hezbollah and you get a pager. And you put it in your pocket. And so Israel somehow got the list of all the phone numbers tied to all the pagers of all the terrorists in Lebanon, an entire country. And somehow they were able to figure out, and it's not that hard, these pagers use batteries. The batteries can be overheated. Those overheated batteries cause explosions. They blow up. And, well, Israel was able to send a signal to each of the pagers to overheat the batteries, to cause the batteries to go boom. And so the batteries and the testicles of the terrorists went boom. And many of the terrorists bled out from the explosions. So it wasn't just that they got vasectomied, they got died. They're dead. They went boom, straight to Allah. This is remarkable technology. This is impressive. This is impressive stuff. I gotta say, kudos to Israel for being able to pull this off. In all seriousness, this is Tom Clancy stuff. So there was an author. He is deceased. His name, Tom Clancy. And Tom Clancy wrote some brilliant books. Now, you need to know that there are still books being produced in Tom Clancy's name. Tom Clancy's dead, franchised out his name, and towards the end of his life, he was continuing to turn out books with a co-writer. But when he was in his prime, Tom Clancy wrote a series of books about the CIA. Jack Ryan was the lead spy. They started with Hunt for Red October, which was turned into a famous movie with Sean Connery and Alec Baldwin, a great movie in its own right, a fabulous book. Then there was Cardinal in the Kremlin, which is a book that should have been turned into a movie, but with the fall of the Soviet Union, they'd have to rebrand it somehow. There was Patriot Games. Patriot Games was one of my favorites. So Alec Baldwin left, and Harrison Ford came in as Jack Ryan. And they continued to make these books. So you had Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger. Fantastic books about Cold War spying. Hunt for Red October. If you want a great book to read, Hunt for Red October to this day stands out, even with the fall of the Soviet Union, a brilliant book to read. Patriot Games as well. Cardinal in the Kremlin, actually, a brilliant book. But he would talk about the gadgetry and the wizardry of what the spooks could do, the CIA could do, what the Kremlin could do. In fact, if you go to Washington, D.C., there's an International Spy Museum, and you could go to the Spy Museum, and you can see this very James Bond sort of stuff that they do. Now, it's never as cool as what James Bond had, but it was still amazing technology. But I'm reminded of something that Tom Clancy, in one of his books, wrote. I cannot remember which book he wrote. But it was basically sometimes the most basic stuff is the coolest cloak and dagger stuff. Not his exact words, but sometimes you can do more with the basic stuff than with the fancy stuff. And the pagers are very basic technology. Now, back in the day, pagers used AAA or AA batteries. These days, most pagers use lithium batteries that are rechargeable. You put it on like a little pad, like I put my iPhone on, and you charge it without thinking about it. You pick it back up. You never have to swap out the batteries. Lithium batteries are fantastic. They hold a lot of energy. That's why so many of our devices, my laptop in front of me, my iPad in front of me, my iPhone, my Apple Watch in front of me, they all use lithium batteries. But lithium batteries are actually to some degree unstable. It's why, for example, when you're on a plane, you're not allowed to put lithium batteries in the luggage compartment, because if they ever do catch fire, they want to be able to respond quickly to them, as opposed to they're in the luggage hold catching everything on fire and the plane burns up. Lithium batteries have some instability. And one of the things that you can do with a lithium battery is you can overheat it. If you drop it, if it's damaged, you can cause it to start a chain reaction that overheats it. But more importantly, you can trigger certain connections to cell phones, to laptops, to iPads, to pagers that begin the chain reaction of overheating the battery. And once the battery begins to overheat, it reaches a tipping point through which there's no turning back, and eventually it catches fire and it explodes. So let's think about this. Israel had to have sources that could give it the phone numbers of all the Hezbollah pagers, because people with pagers in Lebanon who were not with Hezbollah, their pagers did not go boom. It was just the people who were the terrorists for Hezbollah, who had ties to Hezbollah. What we can be certain is that the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon clearly had ties to and was communicating with Hezbollah. Now, this is something we always knew, but today we now know the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon is a victim of the Israeli vasectomy technology. This is really wild stuff. They have incapacitated over 1,200 people spontaneously, and the videos are wild. There's one video of security camera footage at a grocery store in Lebanon where a man is shopping for groceries. He's standing next to someone, and all of a sudden there's an explosion, and the one man with the pager falls over next to the other man. The other man jumps out of the way, startled. Someone else is there. You've got CCTV, closed circuit television footage of somebody driving a scooter down the road in Beirut, and suddenly, boom, he falls over dead on the scooter. This is happening all over the country. It's not just in Beirut. North to south in Lebanon, the pagers have been exploding. I left my phone on the other side of the room just to be on the safe side. You never know. Want to make sure you're not on some list. Wife wants you to have a vasectomy. She's called the Mossad. This is incredible stuff. Now, here's the thing. Where does all of this play out? This plays out in that a lot of these 1,200 terrorists for Hezbollah have been trying to cross into Israel and have also been plotting mass weapons shipments around into Egypt through tunnels into Hamas territory. So Hezbollah is in the north of Israel. Hamas is in the south of Israel. Hezbollah and Hamas are both funded by Iran. Hamas in the south is fighting Israel because of the October 7th situation. Hezbollah has responded with Iranian funds to launch air war, missiles and drones into northern Israel. And many people from northern Israel have had to move south in Israel, and they can't go home to their northern Israeli territories. And meanwhile, what Hezbollah is doing is it's also, it's coastal, just like Israel, gets ships, sails down to Egypt, gives armaments to Hamas, and Hamas runs them up from the south into Israel in a perpetual arms cycle. Many of these terrorists are involved in this. Well, I should say, because they're all dead today. Not all of them died. Some of them are just critically wounded. Hospitals in Lebanon are overwhelmed today. I am very impressed that Israel was able to pull this off. Steve has already emailed me. Steve cannot believe that I am willing to believe that Israel was able to pull this off. Steve does not believe, apparently, that Israel is capable of doing this. I am very convinced Israel is capable of doing this because the Israeli Mossad and Shin Bet do some amazing things. And Israel knew exactly what it was doing and knew how to target these people. And Israel, you should note, was not saying they were responsible. It was very obvious when it came out that the only pagers in Lebanon that were exploding were the ones tied to Hezbollah terrorists. And Israel like, don't look at us. No idea what you're talking about, as they giggled. Kudos to Israel for being able to incapacitate these terrorists. Now, let's extrapolate this. The United States, well, we have a war against us right now. I'm not talking about China. I'm talking about the drug cartels from Mexico. Why can't we accidentally do something similar? This technology, Israel just proved it can be done, and it works. It's something that every other government should be looking at, and we should be considering this when we're dealing with these terrorists that have invaded this country from Venezuela, from Mexico, and elsewhere. This is a very easy way to figure out who these people are and, well, incapacitate them. And, you know, the iPhone and the Android device, they're larger than the pagers and have much bigger batteries than the pagers. Those pagers went boom. What would the phones do? Maybe government should start analyzing how can we track these people and disable a large group of a terrorist network that is funneling drugs into the United States. But I digress from Israel. Welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. Real quick, the story continues to evolve pretty quickly. So here are more details now. And I actually, during commercial break, was able to exchange some information with a guy who actually I know to be an expert on this. So we're now up to 2,750 wounded individuals. The number I told you was 1,200. 8 people are killed. So here's what we know from Lebanon. According to the Wall Street Journal now, a Hezbollah official says that the affected pagers were from a new shipment received in recent days. Hundreds of fighters had such devices, and they believe it was malware on the devices. Now, the guy that I'm texting with says there are a couple of things. One, if they are from new devices, they could have been tampered with and a small explosive embedded, but more likely what happens is you can generate a chain reaction in a lithium battery, even a small one, that will generate essentially a steam explosion. As the battery begins to heat, the internal components begin to melt, steam is generated, it's in a contained environment, and it then explodes with a lot of force, which is why 2,750 people wounded, but only 8 dead. The explosion would not be enough to kill most people, except depending on where they had the pager on their body. That could have caused a problem. So it could be a malware deployment, which is what Hezbollah is speculating. It could be a signal deployment where Israel is somehow able to generate a signal to those batteries that force them to overheat. Or it could actually be a small explosive device on the pager. That being said, most likely, given the number of people affected, the fact that they didn't catch that there was any sort of device implanted in the pagers, and the fact only 8 people died, the odds are most likely that Israel, if what Hezbollah says is to be confirmed, Israel tampered with the batteries to cause the batteries to malfunction. That it all happened at 3:30 p.m. Beirut time suggests a signal being generated to the phones that triggered malware, according to the news reports now and also the person I spoke to. So a lot of people are thinking big explosions. So clearly there had to be bombs in the pagers, but that doesn't appear to be the case. It appears to be the case that they did cause the lithium-ion batteries to generate a chain reaction that caused a steam explosion, injuring 2,750 people, killing 8 people. We're still finding out more, though, rapidly developing story, but the numbers of wounded continue to go up. Hospitals in Lebanon are overwhelmed. Good for Israel. This is a local story in Rome, Georgia. I'm up there on the radio, and this is just a story that all of us get to hear on a regular basis in the United States these days. Here's the headline from WSB TV. Mother of 3 killed, 1-year-old daughter critically injured after head-on DUI crash in Floyd County. 2 people are dead, and a suspected DUI driver is behind bars following a head-on crash earlier this month. According to Rome police, Omar Garcia was spotted driving a black Dodge Charger that turned right from Lavender Drive onto Shorter Avenue. Officials said Garcia was speeding, which prompted a chase. Rome Police Department learned that the Charger was a red-eye edition, which is equipped with a supercharger and generates 797 horsepower. The Charger vanished, and police called off the chase and issued a lookout to all nearby officers. Moments later, another officer traveling south on Riverside Parkway spotted the Charger at a distance, still speeding eastbound on Turner McCall Boulevard. Once the officer activated their lights and tried to follow the Charger, the officer arrived at the scene of a severe head-on crash involving the Charger and a Honda Accord. The wreck resulted in the death of Kadrian LaMiracle Harris, 23, and Malik Crystal Henderson, 23. According to a GoFundMe, Harris was the mother of 3 children. Her 1-year-old daughter was critically injured. Kendra Moten, the organizer of the GoFundMe, identified herself as Harris's big sister, and the 1-year-old is Riley Harris. Passengers in the Charger sustained minor injuries and were hospitalized. The Floyd County Sheriff's Office said Garcia was traveling 80 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour speed zone. Garcia was arrested and charged with 2 counts of vehicular homicide, 1 count of serious injury by vehicle, DUI, driving without a license, fleeing, attempting to elude, reckless driving, and driving too fast for conditions. He was booked into the Floyd County Jail. Additionally, the Floyd County Sheriff's Office says Omar Garcia has a hold through the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE. ICE. There you go. Another one. Another person here who ICE was looking for, who probably shouldn't have been here, that got in through the Biden-Harris administration policies. I want to play you this. This is Bill Malugin on Fox News. Did you know how Joe Biden and Kamala Harris now say that the number of border crossings of illegal aliens has gone down? The number of border crossings of illegal aliens has gone down. You know how they did it? Listen.
Record high illegal crossings down at the southern border have obviously been a huge political headache for the Biden administration. So at the start of 2023, they created 2 new programs to allow migrants to come into the U.S. legally, bypassing Border Patrol entirely. And according to new CBP data, those Biden programs have now allowed more than 1.3 million migrants to come into the U.S. So take a look at this. According to that CBP data, about 530,000 migrants have now flown into the U.S. as part of the Biden administration's controversial mass parole program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. It's called the CHNV program. Now, more than 200,000 of them have been Haitians coming in, and at least 2 of those Haitians were arrested for sexually assaulting children this year. Take a look. Earlier this month, Haitian national Akeem Mark Desire was arrested for allegedly molesting a 10-year-old boy in Massachusetts. He first flew into the U.S. as part of the CHNV parole program in June of 2023. Then back in March, another Haitian national, Corey Alvarez, was arrested for aggravated child rape. That's after prosecutors say he raped a girl in a migrant hotel outside of Boston. He also flew into the U.S. as part of the CHNV parole program back in June of 2023. Now, there's a second program. According to CBP data, since January 2023, more than 800,000 migrants have now been allowed into the U.S. via the Biden administration's use of the controversial CBP One cell phone app. That allows migrants to book appointments at ports of entry to be released into the U.S. That includes nearly 45,000 migrants last month alone, an average of nearly 1,500 migrants coming in every single day. And this year, Kenal Baptiste, a Haitian national who came into the U.S. in July 2023 via that cell phone app, was arrested in New York and charged with a double murder.
They've reduced the number of illegal aliens coming into the country by creating programs that allow them to come in the country and designate them as allowed to be here. They've essentially cooked the books, which is what they've been doing on the economy. It's what they've been doing on crime. It's what they've been doing on illegal immigration. This is one of the very important points to be made. You know how, for example, they tried to fact check Donald Trump at the debate to say that actually crime is down in the country. 2 things. 1, the FBI changed how it collects crime data. And many of the major cities in the country stopped reporting their crime data to the FBI. Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Baltimore, New Orleans, St. Louis, New York, among others, stopped reporting their crime data to the FBI. So you can't say, looking at the FBI data, that crime is down because major cities that are hotbeds of crime stopped reporting to it. Second, the other issue is a lot of people have stopped reporting a number of crimes. For example, shoplifting crimes are down, theft crimes are down, but that's not actually true. It's that people have stopped reporting those crimes in a number of areas of this country because they know it's not going to get enforced. So why bother? They cook the books and tell you that you got to believe the data. The data overstated employment in this country by 1 million people, and every month they've been revising it down. And now the Biden administration has been telling us the number of illegal aliens coming into this country is down. And as Bill Malugin at Fox News has discovered, one of the things they did is they created new programs so that illegal aliens can come into this country, bypass the border system, and they can be considered allowed to be here. They're not legal residents. They're allowed to be here pending processing, and more than one of them has committed a crime. And now we have 2 women in Rome, Georgia, dead because of someone who came here due to the Biden-Harris administration policies of an open border. We have multiple young women in the United States murdered because of it. We have young men murdered because of it. We have people killed in driving incidents because of it. You can tell me all you want that actually illegal aliens are less likely to commit crime than people who are legally allowed to be here and American citizens. And that's all well and good, except all of these people killed by illegal aliens would be alive, not because of legal citizens killing them, but because of the illegal aliens. You can tell me I'm not supposed to use the word illegal alien, that's racist, but all you're trying to do is to distract from the fact that the Biden-Harris administration has decided to play word games and cook books instead of dealing with the problem. What is infuriating to me as well is how the Republicans are not every single day talking about this issue. Why talk about illegal aliens taking the lives of Americans on a near daily basis in this country when you can tweet about your hatred of Taylor Swift? There are very real problems. Much of the American press corps and the Democratic Party would prefer you not pay attention to the problems. In fact, many of them would prefer to cook the books to make it look like the problem's not there, even though you and I and everyone else knows the problem is there. But also one of the problems is the Republicans just keep getting distracted, or at least certain Republicans keep getting distracted and not talking about the issue that really matters. Americans are getting killed by illegal aliens who have been allowed into this country by the Biden-Harris administration. And you know what the pushback is from the Biden-Harris administration and the media is that, well, it would be unconscionable to do a mass roundup of all of these illegal aliens and deport them. How dare we try to deport the people who aren't supposed to be here? It's their Calvin ball. They keep moving the goalposts on us. They say, well, yes, we agree with you that we have too many illegal aliens in the country, so let's deport them. No, we can't deport them. That would be cruel and unusual punishment to people who aren't even supposed to be here. They just keep moving the goalposts. They keep rewriting the rules. The fact of the matter is, this is an issue that the Republicans actually should be talking about on a regular basis. And at the senior levels, they seem to get easily distracted by other things. You don't have to talk about dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio, being stolen and cooked. You can talk about Kadrian Harris and Malik Henderson killed by Omar Garcia. You can talk about Laken Riley murdered in Athens, Georgia. You can talk about all the other Americans whose lives have been cut short because of the open border policies of the Biden-Harris administration. You can talk about the economic fallout. You can talk about the gangs coming into the country. You don't have to make stuff up to try to get the media to pay attention to it. You can repeat on a daily basis the things that are real, that are outrageous, that should outrage Americans on a daily basis. But Republicans, too clever by half, have decided they'd rather invent clever lies that are salacious to get the media to pay attention than to actually on a daily basis mention the names of the dead Americans killed by illegal aliens, which in my mind would be a much more powerful way to convey the same story, the fallout and consequences of the open border policies of the Biden-Harris administration, which is now creating programs so that they can avoid counting people as illegal aliens and claim instead they're allowed to be here, so we shouldn't hold the data against them. They're cooking the books to hide the fallout of their policies, and Republicans regularly should be calling them out. Yet again, more Americans have been killed by illegal aliens. And for those of you who yet again want to say, but, Americans are more violent and commit more crimes, maybe so, but these people would be alive except for the illegal aliens, not the Americans. If you did not hear Governor DeWine's press conference, turns out that the bomb threats to the local schools and City Hall and others in Springfield, Ohio, were foreign-based hoaxes. Now, I need to step back to the Mueller investigation. The Mueller investigation came from the allegations about Donald Trump related to the Steele dossier and other things. He was the special counsel brought in, and here's the thing. What the left and the media and the Democrats have tried to avoid grappling with is what Bob Mueller showed pretty decisively, is that the Russians weren't trying to get Donald Trump elected in 2016. What the Russians were trying to do was sow discord in this country so that the left and right would be at each other's throats. And that if we were turned inwardly, looking at each other as the enemy, we would ignore what the Russians were doing abroad. And to this day, the Russians and outside foreign agitators are trying to sow discord in this country in the run-up to the election. It has nothing to do with about picking a side. It has to do with making Americans fight each other ever more viciously. It turns out that the 30 bomb threats were foreign-perpetrated hoaxes in Springfield, Ohio, according to Governor Mike DeWine. Many of them from the same country. He did not say what country that was. Now, let's also tie that to the story of Tenet Media, where the FBI alleges that Russia Today worked with a woman and her husband who were Canadian, and then paid a number of American commentators large sums of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, for not a whole lot of work, to produce videos that advanced a Russian talking point, a Russian line that sowed more discord and division in this country. Now, those who were paid, it appears, probably didn't know they were being paid, but I do kind of think that if you're being paid several $100,000 a month for not a whole lot of work, you should probably ask some questions. That they didn't want to ask questions means they probably had suspicions, particularly knowing supposedly that the person involved was foreign from another country, and that was a created person. It was actually the Russians. The Russians are trying to stir up division in this country. The Chinese are doing it as well. So now let's fast forward to the Trump assassination story. This is the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And what the left is doing and what the media is doing is Calvin ball. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of Calvin ball comes from the cartoon Calvin and Hobbes. The boy Calvin and his imaginary but very real tiger Hobbes, Calvin would play Calvin ball. And the rules of Calvin ball were very simple. There were no rules except they benefited Calvin. And the rules would always be changed so that Calvin could always win. That was Calvin ball. And that's what the press is doing, and that's what the Democrats are doing with the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And it ties into this situation because I have a friend. I know many of you don't care for my friend Anna Navarro. She was on The View. I think the world of Anna and her husband. We just vehemently disagree on politics. She and I get along very well, and we just don't talk about politics. She despises Donald Trump, as does her husband. I have known her for longer than I've known many of you. And we just don't talk about politics. We don't talk to each other on a regular basis these days. But I need to play you this bit from Anna on CNN. And I don't tend to like to engage with friends of mine, particularly if they're not here with me to talk about it. But I got to play you this audio.
I agree with you. It's, I think we should all question the rhetoric. The problem is that Donald Trump, who I think, if you were doing hurricane categories, he's on hurricane category 5, whereas the other side might be a 2. And Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are not questioning the rhetoric. Right now, because of their rhetoric, because of what he said in that debate, there's been 33 bombing threats in Springfield, Ohio. That would not have happened but for this false conspiracy theory being spread by the vice presidential and presidential Republican candidate. And those Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, and those students and the people that are victims of these threats and everything that's going on there don't have 24/7 Secret Service, right? They're on their own.
She might not have known at the time she said it. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. They were hoaxes spread by foreign agitators who wanted to divide this country. And to her point, she wants to categorize the rhetoric of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance as a Category 5 hurricane and maybe the other side a Category 2. I would tell her that I think the other side is a Category 5 and that instead of trying to hold the other side accountable, it's time to hold your own side accountable. I mean, this is always my frustration with people in the media who they're not on my side and they want to hold my side accountable. They never want to hold their side accountable. It relates to, for example, Nikemia Williams, who is a Georgia congresswoman, went on CNN with Cassie Hunt. Listen to this conversation.
I'd like to start just with what J.D. Vance said there and your reaction to how he talked about Kamala Harris.
So it's no secret that I'm not a Trump supporter, but when I heard the news, I don't want that for anyone, regardless of their party. And what I heard from J.D. Vance is no one has tried to kill Kamala Harris. Would he want that? Why would you say that in a time when we're talking about bringing down the temperature and changing the rhetoric and bringing the country together, unity, moving forward? We can disagree on policies, but we don't want anyone to have an assassination attempt.
That's true. That's true. But notice that she gets to respond to this comment from J.D. Vance.
You know, the big difference between conservatives and liberals is that no one has tried to kill Kamala Harris in the last couple of months, and 2 people now have tried to kill Donald Trump in the last couple of months. I'd say that's pretty strong evidence that the left needs to tone down the rhetoric and needs to cut this crap out. Somebody's going to get hurt by it, and it's going to destroy this country.
He's right, by the way. But notice what CNN did there. What Cassie Hunt on CNN did is she allowed this Congresswoman Williams, to respond to J.D. Vance to suggest that he's trying to get Kamala Harris killed, as opposed to pointing out that there have been 2 assassination attempts on one person in this country, and it's Donald Trump. And back to Ana Navarro's point that the Democrats are a Category 2 hurricane, he's a Category 5. You may think that, but I don't think that. And here's why I don't think that. Because on MSNBC on a daily basis, they refer to Donald Trump as a would-be tyrant who would take back power if he gets elected and never give it up. That he's the second coming of Hitler. That we are in the pre-Third Reich phase of this country. We're headed into the Third Reich. Michael Beschloss, the noted historian on Morning Joe and other programs, has said he's a tyrant. If someone doesn't stop him, he's going to be a tyrant and not give up power. And he's not alone. Regularly on MSNBC, that network in particular, they talk about Donald Trump as if he gets elected, he's never leaving power. Somebody's got to do something. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, refers to Donald Trump as a threat to democracy. Now, here's the more important point. You guys on the left believe that Donald Trump incited an insurrection with his words by telling people to storm the Congress. So did Joe Biden and Kamala Harris not inspire would-be assassins by saying if Donald Trump's not stopped, he's going to be an authoritarian, he's a threat to democracy? Did Michael Beschloss and the gang at MSNBC not inspire assassins? Because I got to tell you, James Hodgkinson, who attempted the mass assassination of Republican members of Congress, was an MSNBC viewer who heard on MSNBC the Republicans were harming old people with their attempt to repeal Obamacare. And remember, Democrats said people would die if net neutrality was repealed. People would die if the Trump tax cuts went through. People would die if Obamacare was repealed. And this guy decided he was going to stop the deaths of many by taking the lives of a few. That's from Democratic rhetoric. You listen, if you want to say Donald Trump's rhetoric is a Category 5 hurricane, okay. But don't tell me that the left, when they say that grandma's going to go off a cliff, this was a Democratic mail piece showing Paul Ryan shoving a grandmother off a cliff, that's not Category 5. Don't tell me that Democratic politicians saying people will die if Obamacare is repealed, we got to stop them, isn't Category 5. If you're going to classify them according to the hurricane scale, you can't tell me Democrats with a straight face telling people Republicans are going to kill people isn't serious. Where did Donald Trump say the Haitians are killing people? He said they're killing their pets. I don't know that Donald Trump said the Haitians are killing people in Ohio. Oh, but wait, a Haitian did kill an 11-year-old boy in Springfield, Ohio. The left doesn't want to hold themselves to the standards. It's Calvin ball here. Listen, this is again on MSNBC. Again, on MSNBC. It's always MSNBC.
No question about it. But my point about whataboutism still stands. And you know that we're in a fact-free zone here, Joe. So you issued that challenge. And you're absolutely right. There's never been a Democratic leader or a Democratic candidate for president who has used rhetoric like telling Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. Never, never. But I promise you, as we speak right now, your social media feed is filling up with backbenchers and state assembly people from Oregon, et cetera, who have said unwise things. But my larger point is here, if we succumb to the destruction of moral discernment that comes with a reliance on the what about defense, they do it too, we're done. We're done.
Notice how they don't want to be held accountable on their own rhetoric. Notice the pivot. You're going to get examples, but those examples don't matter. Only Donald Trump matters. Joe Biden and the Democrats say if Donald Trump's not stopped, democracy's over. That's the president of the United States of America. It is that network, MSNBC, that regularly says that Donald Trump is going to destroy the country, that our days may be at an end if Donald Trump isn't stopped. That's that network. And so they want to play Calvin ball and say, oh, Donald Trump says these terrible things. And when you get examples in your social media feed of Democrats, well, those don't really count. We can't do this both sides thing. Only Donald Trump does. And now you've got Democrats, you've got The Atlantic, you've got all of these other outlets saying, well, Donald Trump's kind of asking for it. His rhetoric is so outlandish, he's kind of asking for it. It's always the Republican rhetoric that's outlandish. But remember, George W. Bush was a racist. John McCain was a racist. Mitt Romney was a racist. They were always racists. They were always vilified. Every one of them was vilified. Remember, George W. Bush, when he ran for office in 2000, 2 men in Texas had tied a black man to the back of a truck with chains and dragged him to kill him. George W. Bush executed those men in Texas. As governor of Texas, he signed their death warrants and killed them. Democrats attacked him for not doing enough to stop the lynching of black men in Texas. And it was as if George W. Bush was lynching black men in Texas because he didn't charge the 2 men he had executed with a hate crime. Democrats always apply the rhetoric to the Republicans and always find a way to make themselves not culpable. And you know what it is now? You've got David French from The Atlantic saying, well, the difference is the things Donald Trump says aren't true. The things the left says, they actually are true. So you really believe that the country is over if Donald Trump gets elected? I'm willing to bet you if Donald Trump gets elected in 4 years, we're going to have another election. It's not that what you say is true. It's that what you say you hope other people believe is true. And you find a way to excuse yourself. And what we're seeing now is the left has now moved rapidly from these assassination attempts against Donald Trump are bad to he's asking for it. And that heats things up at a time the Democrats say they want to cool things down. There's increasing evidence that social media is bad and is actually a tie-in to blame for a lot of the mental health problems that we're having in this country. There's a piece in the Wall Street Journal, Jonathan Haidt and Will Johnson. Dr. Haidt's a social psychologist, spent a lot of time writing about social media and its ills and the effects of technology on kids. Let me just read you part of this. Was social media a good invention? One way to quantify the value of a product is to find out how many of the people who use it wish it had never been invented. Feelings of regret or resentment are common with addictive products like cigarettes and addictive activities like gambling, even if most users say they enjoy them. For non-addictive products, hairbrushes, say, or bicycles, walkie-talkies, or ketchup, it's rare to find people who use the product every day yet wish it could be banished from the world. What about social media? They achieved global market penetration faster than almost any product in history. The category took hold in the early aughts with Friendster, MySpace, and the one that rose to dominance, Facebook. By 2020, more than half of all humans were using some form of social media. So if this were any normal product, we'd assume that people love it and are grateful to the companies that provide it to them, without charge, no less. But it turns out that it can be hard for people who don't like social media to avoid it because when everyone else is on it, the abstainers begin to miss out on information, trends, and gossip. This is especially painful for adolescents whose social networks have migrated since the early 2010s onto a few giant platforms. Nearly all American teenagers use social media regularly. They spend an average of nearly 5 hours a day on these platforms. So what does Gen Z think about social media? It's more like walkie-talkies where hardly anyone wished they had never been invented, or is it more like cigarettes, where people enjoy smoking, but more than 71% of smokers regret even starting? Turns out Gen Z hates social media, even as they use it more than anyone else. They're not happy with it. It's not just what it's doing to them, but also what it's doing to their family, what they see it being done to their parents. I have to say, I see it happening in my audience. mean that lovingly. Let's take the Trump shooting in Florida as just one example. When John Hinckley attempted the assassination of Ronald Reagan, he had an idea of where Ronald Reagan was going to be, got up on a rooftop, was able to evade the Secret Service, and he was an insane person. And he got lucky, got a shot off, and nearly killed Ronald Reagan. He got lucky. When, what's his name? John Lennon's assassin killed him. Same thing. A lot of luck was involved. Mark David Chapman. Thank you, Jim. When Mark David Chapman killed John Lennon, there was a lot of luck involved in timing of where he was and stalking and everything else. We know about this guy in Florida that he was there based on cell phone records of what information we're learning. He was there for 12 hours from about 2 o'clock in the morning. And he took a chance. Donald Trump doesn't go to church on Sundays. Donald Trump goes to the golf course. Donald Trump didn't have a public schedule, which meant he wasn't on the campaign trail. So the odds are Donald Trump was going to go play golf. If he's at Mar-a-Lago on a Sunday, he's got several golf courses. Where do you go? Well, this guy chose the closest one to Mar-a-Lago that Trump owned. Turns out that's where Trump went. Because this man showed up at the golf course and waited in the bushes for 12 hours with a gun that he had tried to file off the serial number, there are people who are convinced he must have worked for someone. He must be an Iranian agent. What we know about the man is that he was a crazy person who had driven his Nissan Xterra down from North Carolina carrying a gun across state lines. We don't yet know where he got the gun. People are already speculating. It probably came from some government agency. Might have come from some foreigners. Maybe he was working with Russians, or maybe he stole the gun. Maybe even though he was a felon, he had it and refused to surrender it, said it had been lost in a boating accident like so many conservatives say they're going to do. We don't know. But he sat in the bushes at the golf course closest to where Donald Trump was, hoping that Donald Trump would come. And people have concluded, well, he must have been tipped off. Someone must have told him, or he got lucky, like John Hinckley, like Mark David Chapman, like so many other would-be assassins. They got lucky. He took a guess. Crazy people can make educated guesses. Donald Trump's not going to go to church on Sunday. He goes and plays golf on Sunday when he's not on the campaign trail. Which golf course do I think he's going to be at? Maybe the one closest to his house. I'm going to wait in the bushes there and see if he shows up. But people want to make simple things more complex these days, and they want to make complex things very simple because they have to have all the answers and they have to rationalize it. And that's one of the things that comes out in the surveys of social media is because we live in a 24/7 news cycle, people are less likely these days than ever in the past to accept that some things don't have answers. Everything's got to have an answer. Not only does everything have to have an answer, everything must also be rationalized. And where we are as a society now is conspiracy has become the new witchcraft. In the 16 and 1700s, in the 1500s, things that could not be explained were explained as demons or witches, magic. And now, in the absence of answer, it must be conspiracy of the government, of corporation. The government and corporations, foreign actors, they become the new witches. They become the new witchcraft. They become the new demons. People just can't accept in a 24/7 news cycle where we seem to know everything about the atom, we may not be able to ascertain someone's motivation for doing something. Therefore, it must be a government plot. Therefore, it must be a conspiracy. Therefore, it must be sinister. Therefore, it must be bad. And sometimes you just don't know the answer. Or sometimes you have a theory about things and you are confronted with evidence that your theory is wrong. So instead of reassessing your theory, because we're not allowed to be wrong. In this country, we're not allowed to be wrong. In Western society, People have thought, particularly people on social media, you're not allowed to be wrong, so it must be something else. So Kamala Harris outperforms Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris is a vapid dimwit. We all know she's a vapid dimwit. So how could she get the better of the man you've always assured yourselves is a genius? Well, ABC must have given her the questions in advance. The oh so difficult questions of Kamala Harris. What's your economic plan? The oh so difficult questions of Kamala Harris, your opponent sucks. Tell us why. The oh so difficult questions of Kamala Harris, what are you going to do about global warming? The oh so difficult questions of Kamala Harris, your opponent put 3 justices on the Supreme Court who got rid of Roe v. Wade. What do you think about that? The oh so difficult questions of Kamala Harris, can you tell us as president, why will your poop not stink? The oh so difficult questions. She must have been fed the questions in advance. And oh, hey, here's an affidavit full of grammatical errors and misspellings where every piece of information that could identify it is redacted. So it must be true. It must be true because I can't acknowledge that Kamala Harris did well. It must be a conspiracy. She must have been wearing speakers in her ears to feed her the answers because there's no way she could give such shallow, vapid, unchallenged answers. Someone must have had speakers in her ears. Everything's got to be a conspiracy. It's the new witchcraft. It's no different from the people in the 15 and 1600s who couldn't acknowledge themselves to be wrong about something or couldn't acknowledge they didn't know, so they had to say it was witchcraft. They had to say it was the demons. They had to say it was the full moon with Mercury rising through the Aquarius, the Gemini, whatever convoluted answer they would give. We're back to an age of metaphysics. Because we live in an age where everything is known. We can crack the code on the atom, and we can land rovers on Mars and send back high-definition video. So there can't be anything we don't know, and we can't accept that we don't know answers. And even in cases where the answers are slow going and the stories are developing over time, we must extrapolate based on the limited information we have to provide the answers, because in a 24/7 news cycle, God forbid we might have to wait a couple of weeks to find out where the gun came from for this shooter. Since he filed off the serial number, it must be from the Russians or the government or Antifa or Kamala Harris. That's what social media has done to our brains. That's what social media has done. And so then what happens is we get very mad at the people who tell us we're wrong. And they don't even say we're wrong. They just give you the truth. And you get mad at the truth teller because they're telling you either what you don't want to hear or you've reconciled in your brain and explained it. And so since you're a very smart person, you all know you're very smart people. If someone comes along and tells you you're wrong, well, that's a personal insult, even though you've extrapolated witchcraft from your conspiracy theory. That's what the data gets to with social media and why young people realize it's bad. It's not just because they're competing against other people. It's not just because it's their self-esteem. It's not just because they see themselves being left out of things that their friends have done and it draws in despair. It also causes them agitation and anxiety over the unknown. This back to Jonathan Haidt. While respondents cite more benefits than harms, that doesn't justify the unregulated distribution of consumer products that it's hurting, damaging really millions of children and young adults. We're not just talking about the sad feeling from FOMO, the fear of missing out or social comparison. We're talking about a range of documented risks from the use of social media from heavy users, including sleep deprivation, body image distortion, depression, anxiety, exposure to content promoting suicide and eating disorders, sexual predation and sextortion, and problematic use, which is the term psychologists use to describe compulsive overuse that interferes with success in other areas of life. If any other consumer product was causing serious harm to more than 1 out of every 10 of its young users, there would be a tidal wave of state and federal legislation to ban or regulate it. That's what social media is doing to Gen Zers. But also, Gen Zers are noticing what it's doing to their parents. There's a great meme I love that Fox News and MSNBC are doing to our parents what they told us video games would do to us? We're so online, we're so tuned in, we're so plugged in, we must have answers to everything, and when the answers don't come quickly, we have to justify what's going on and explain it in our mind. And then when the answer does come along, because we've come up with an answer ourselves that is wrong, we can't acknowledge that we're wrong. And so we descend further into blaming witchcraft. The problem these days is that it's not actually witchcraft, it's conspiracy. Everything is a conspiracy. Everything has to have an answer. And when we can't find that answer, it's got to be the government or the corporation or the big bad thing we hate, which is the witches. And we descend further into a societal madness that has in part helped inspire two individuals to try to kill a former president of the United States. The 24/7 news cycle, always on demand for information that we then magnify through social media, is hurting a lot of people and rotting a lot of people's brains, and they don't even realize it's happening. One of the side effects of our 21st century thinking, where we blame conspiracies, and conspiracies are the modern witchcraft. In the 15 and 1600s, people would blame the witches. Now we're blaming the government and big business. Well, consumers are worried about the future, catastrophizing the what-if scenarios of the future. By the way, you should know the stock market has surged and the Dow has broken records and made back all its losses. It's gained back enough to overcome all the losses, in large part because U.S. households have started spending again. There seems to be some increasing positive view of the economy, even as people are worried about the future. A record share of U.S. households, according to Bloomberg, are uncertain about the economic outlook, and most expect inflation to take a bigger chunk of their incomes. Plus, the likelihood of a comfortable retirement is the lowest in decades. People are starting to really worry about the future. With the pace of inflation, while the pace of inflation is cooling, prices remain much higher than before the pandemic. The Consumer Price Index has surged 21.5% from the end of 2019, and while incomes have also increased, consumers still say they're not getting ahead. As stock prices approach a record, the odds Americans see a comfortable retirement are nevertheless at their lowest since 2013. People are increasingly fretful about the future. People are increasingly concerned they're not going to have enough for retirement. They're worried about China. They're worried about war. They're worried about terrorism. They're worried about domestic violence. The country itself, people feel like we're headed towards crossing some sort of Rubicon. Side note. In the last 48 hours, the Democratic rhetoric about Donald Trump and the second attempted assassination is that he's got it coming. It's his words. It's his rhetoric. It's him. He's doing it to himself. It's not us. It's not our saying we're at the verge of a third Reich. Nope, don't blame us for that. It's not us saying he's a threat to democracy. Nope, he is a threat to democracy. This is all on him. The Democrats, the left, the media itself trying to avoid any culpability, putting it all on Donald Trump. His skirt is so short, he deserved to be raped. That's the logic you do understand, those of you on the left. What you're saying is that Donald Trump's skirt is so short, he had it coming. But occasionally I have to do this. Occasionally I have to do this. And I need to remind you all, including those of you who have resorted more and more to sending me hate mail because I'm not telling you what you want to hear. Everything's going to be okay. It may not feel like it, but everything's going to be okay. The world has lost its mind. Many people around you have lost their mind. Sometimes you feel like you're losing your mind. You're worried about the future. You're worried about making ends meet. You're worried about your money. You're worried about your mortgage. You're worried about your credit card bill. You're worried about your car payment. You're worried about your retirement. You're worried about your kids. You're worried about your kids' jobs. You're worried about your kids' future. You're worried, are you even going to have grandkids one day? All things work for the good of those called according to his purpose. Everything's going to be okay. You may not get the outcome you desire in the election. You may not get the pay raise you want. You may struggle. But the world's not going to come to an end. In 4 years, Democrats, if Donald Trump gets elected, there's going to be another election. There's not going to be an autocracy. There's not going to be a tyranny. There's not going to be a dictatorship. Republicans, if Kamala Harris gets elected in 4 years, you'll have an opportunity to find a better candidate to beat her. Some of you would rather catastrophize your thinking and decide disaster awaits so that you can be pleasantly surprised when the outcome isn't as bad as you expect it to be. You'd rather be pleasantly surprised by the normal outcome than to actually realize that things aren't going to be as bad as you think, because you don't want to be disappointed. If your side loses, you're going to be disappointed. So you would rather presume that, well, the other side's going to steal it. So if it doesn't get stolen, you're delighted. And if they do win, you can say, well, they stole it. It's not actually on me, and I didn't pick a bad candidate. It's me. People want to catastrophize their thinking, but everything's going to be fine. That doesn't mean that you're going to win the lottery. It doesn't mean that you're going to be sufficiently stockpiled in retirement that you're going to be filthy rich. Things may not go the way you want, but overall things are going to be fine. The sun's going to come up tomorrow. There is going to be a future. There is going to be a tomorrow. It may not be the one you want. Life is not fair. Life is not fair for your opponents. Life is not fair for you. Life is hard. But everything's going to be fine. Here's why I know everything's going to be fine. Because I don't expect God to get off his throne. I don't expect that tomorrow God's going to say, I quit. And if he's there, everything's going to be fine. I worry for the people who don't believe, because you're the ones who are most likely to be stressed out. So I follow a guy, I read his website. He's an atheist. He thinks that people who believe in religion are the biggest fools. You know, what I find so funny is that there's an argument to be made for the atheists out there who believe in evolution, that maybe religion is an evolutionary tick, that maybe a religion derived from evolution because the people who actually are believers live longer, have happier lives, have lower suicide rates, have healthier marriages. This guy is constantly depressed, divorced, lives a miserable life, worried about the future constantly. I see people like that, and I think, man, the idea that I must be in charge of everything in my destiny, no, that would overwhelm me. I would live my life in terror and be miserable like this guy, struggling with depression and unhappy in my life. I know that tomorrow everything's going to be okay, even if it doesn't go my way, because I know that the good Lord in heaven is not going to send in his retirement papers and say, I quit. I'm leaving this all undone. I trust in the sovereignty of God. And so in these wild, crazy times where you're prone to catastrophizing, where you're prone to conspiracy theory, where you're worried about your retirement and the retirement of your kids, whether or not you're going to have grandkids and your mortgage payment, all I can tell you is it's all going to work out in the end. It's all going to work out in the end. In other words, to put more bluntly and briefly and succinctly, calm down. Side note, on the Israeli pager incident, I am not a catastrophizer. I tend not to be. I'm already getting the, well, what if terrorists do this to Apple's phones? What if all the iPhones blow up? I don't think terrorists have the capability of doing this, but I do think China does. This is just another reason why I think we as a nation continue to have to be very careful about doing business with the Chinese. I know enough about the way iPhones are made and the security chip involved and stuff. I'm not worried about my iPhone blowing up tomorrow. I'm not going to stop using my iPhone. If you want to give up your iPhone and go to a pager or something, you help yourself. But I do worry greatly about the Chinese and the routers from China that we install. This is why the U.S. government has worked so hard to get Huawei out of everything, because they believe there's malware involved. And I do think that this is another example of a national security vulnerability of the United States with our too much integration in China. I do note, I don't have the report in front of me, but I think it was from the Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg the other day, that the number of companies that are moving out of China, their supply lines out of China, this is another reason for them to get out of China. In fact, I believe I read that this year Apple's going to produce more iPhones outside of China than inside China for the very first time. There are clear vulnerabilities, and that Israel was able to generate this attack of over 3,000 pagers blowing up in Lebanon through their malware designed to trigger the battery explosions is just another example of why we as a nation should be very concerned about what China might be doing and should be very cautious about China. I think if Donald Trump wants to go play golf, the Secret Service should deploy whatever resources it needs so he can play golf. And yes, this is a position I would take regardless of his partisanship or political affiliations, just as I think that the President of the United States should be able to go sit safely on the beach if it's good for his brain. I am a terrible golfer, as you all know. While I've gotten better, I'm not a good golfer. But I have to tell you, I enjoy immensely being on a golf course. I would very much like to go this afternoon and just might do so. The reason I like to play is because I'm outside in the sun. I'm not much of an outdoor person, but I just enjoy being on the golf course. And I, in particular, like to play golf by myself. I do not keep score. In fact, I was playing with some guys the other day, and they were asking me about keeping score. So I don't keep score. I actually have a system. I've got this little device. It's called an Arcos, and it's on each of my clubs have one, and it can track with GPS and other stuff how I'm hitting, how I'm playing, how far I've hit the ball, location on the golf course, and all that stuff. And I can keep up with the metrics, and I can tell I'm improving. The more I play, the better I get. I've taken lessons. If you're in the Southeast and you want a great golf instructor, my golf instructor's name's Kyle Morris. He's at the Cartersville Country Club, and he is brilliant. And I can tell you, as someone who's taken lessons at Sea Island and at Sea Pines and at Kiowa and other places, he's the best golf instructor I've ever had. And I've gotten better working with him. And I like to play it. It is a frustrating game. And you should know Donald Trump is actually a really good golfer. If you don't believe me, watch the video with him and Bryson DeChambeau as they're playing. Bryson's got a massive following on YouTube, and Donald Trump is a genuinely good golfer. And there are a lot of people who are convinced he's like one of those third world dictators who no one's allowed to beat. No, Donald Trump actually is a good golfer, and to the extent that you're unwilling to believe it, you're broken by partisanship. It's also good for him to be outside and playing golf. And I have heard stories of people at a Trump golf course, for example. In fact, I don't know the guys. It is a friend of a friend sort of story, so maybe it's not true, but I kind of believe it is because it's similar to so many stories I hear about Trump that they were at Doral, the golf course down in Florida, playing, and that somebody hit a ball onto the green. They were on the green. Somebody hit a ball onto the green. And Donald Trump pulls up in his golf cart, literally onto the green, says, "Sorry, boys, I'm playing through," had the Secret Service in tow. And they let him play. It's his golf course, and he's got the Secret Service with him. They're not going to stop him. But, yeah, I've heard very similar stories from people who play golf with Donald Trump, that if you're in front of him moving slow, he hits into you and goes past you, and he's good enough not to hit you. And let him play golf. Let him play golf. And if that means the Secret Service needs more agents to expand around the perimeter, it's going to be difficult for everybody else who wants to play golf at those courses, but so. The presidents of the United States get the luxury of playing in secure facilities and military installations that keep good golf courses for the commander-in-chief. Donald Trump, he's got to play his own courses. Let him play. Now, all that being said, is it not wild that this is actually a tied race? When I say this, I inevitably get people upset with me for saying it's a tied race, and they say, how? Everyone I know is voting for Donald Trump. It can't be a tied race. And every time that happens to me, I remind them about Pauline Kael, who was a critic for the New York Times, who was shocked, I tell you, that Richard Nixon won re-election because everyone she knew was voting for his opponent. It is a sign of a bubble when you are convinced of something that the data shows is not true. You live in a bubble. Maybe the data is wrong, but why am I to trust your anecdote over the data? What the data shows is that this is a very tied race. And one of the reasons it's a very tied race is because we have one candidate who is very, very polarizing and one candidate who is actually relatively unknown. And the benefit of having a candidate who is a major party candidate who is unknown is that stupid people can pour their hopes and dreams into that person. And yeah, I'm going to say stupid people. This is the Barack Obama effect in 2008. In 2008, people really didn't know where Barack Obama stood on issues. They just knew he wasn't John McCain. And John McCain was a well-known figure, very polarizing figure. The media, he was adored by the media until he ran against a black man. And then he became a racist. But Barack Obama, everybody could pour their hopes and dreams into Barack Obama. You didn't have to know Barack Obama. You just had to know his heart. Kamala Harris is in the same boat. She's relatively unknown. It is wild to me. Donald Trump has, there have been more attempts on Donald Trump's life than Kamala Harris has given job interviews in the press, and she's run for president. But nonetheless, she's an unknown figure. The race is tied. And then there's the persnickety bit of the undecided voter. Harry Inton has run the polling. I want to play you some of this from his interview on CNN.
That 4% in the average of polls, 4% of voters say that they are undecided. That is just half the level that we saw in 2020, well less than the 10% we saw at this point in 2016. So the bottom line is, in this particular election, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are focusing their attention on this tiny, tiny sliver, much lower than we're used to. In fact, it's the lowest level of undecideds that we've seen in polling at this point this entire 21st century.
You know what? That is not surprising at all, that number is so low. But within the margin of error, all the polls that you've been looking at, that number is extremely significant.
Exactly. It can make all the difference in the world.
So what do these undecideds care about? What are their big issues?
What are their top issues? Well, perhaps not surprisingly, 30% say the economy, inflation. That's number one. But number two, they actually don't have a top issue. 28% say there is no top issue, which perhaps isn't so surprising given that they're probably not as tuned into politics. They might care more about the characteristics of the candidates themselves rather than the issues that they represent. But I think that you get this large chunk of undecideds, right, or the large chunk within the undecideds who say there's no top issue. That, of course, makes it difficult for the campaigns to go after them because what exactly are you going to talk about to the folks who say, wait a minute, we don't have a top issue?
Right.
Okay. Let me just tell you my view of this. If you are an undecided voter and you don't even have a top issue, you are an idiot. And here's why neither side should go after those people. Because the odds are those people don't even know what day we vote in this country, and they're not going to vote. They got called by a pollster randomly. And by the way, I get this, and I always get this about this time of year from people. It's always after Labor Day. I always get this, well, how can the polls be real? I myself have never gotten called by a pollster, therefore the polls cannot be real. Now, again, we can go into whether or not the polling is legitimate or not, whether it's right or not, how we should look at the averages, not the individual polls. But the idea that because you haven't gotten a poll, no poll can be legitimate You know, they poll about 1,000. In a country of 350 million people, they poll about 1,000 people. How can that be right? I'm not a statistician. Ask a statistician. But even when Ronald Reagan was president and polling was highly accurate, they were polling about 1,000 people in a country at the time of about 200 million people. And just because you didn't get a call then didn't mean the polling was wrong. The polling was pretty good back then. You just didn't get polled. You don't get polled for a whole lot of reasons. One, you may not be in the database. Two, you may not have a landline. And three, you may not answer the call when they call, and you don't know it's the pollster calling, so you don't answer the phone. They call and call and call and call and call and call and call until they get the number of people they need for their poll. The level of self-centeredness in the I haven't gotten polled, therefore they can't be real. Nonetheless, I digress. Whether you believe them or not, 4% of people, this election is very polarized, and this is why, for the first time, Republicans and Democrats are about at parity with each other. It used to be Democrats, actually, there were more Democrats than Republicans. There are more progressives than there are conservatives, but Democrats versus Republicans is about tied now. Why? Because Hispanic voters and black men are more and more likely to say, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. So they get classified in the polling, and they're Republicans now. And they're tied. But the undecided voter at this point in this election cycle is someone who is undecided and tells the pollster they're undecided, and that doesn't mean they're going to vote. They might not vote. And that's one reason I think what you're seeing, despite what Harry is talking about there on CNN, I think more and more the Democrats and Republicans are going to turn this election into a rally the base moment. They're not going to go out and try to find the undecided voter. They're going to go try to find their voter and turn their voter out. And if you're Donald Trump and the Republicans, particularly what you're going to do is you're going to go try to find the people who say they like Donald Trump, but they don't regularly vote. The less likely voter, but who is decided. Again, if you're an undecided voter in this country at this point, the odds of you showing up on Election Day are pretty slim. As you get closer to Election Day, it is less and less likely the undecided voters are going to show up. The fact that there are only 4% of them in a tied race, that's one reason the media think, oh, obviously, they're going to go try to find this pool of undecided voters and get them to decide. But what do you think is a more efficient way to spend your money? Trying to find an undecided voter and then find a way to persuade them to vote, or to find your voter and get your voter to go vote? In my mind, as someone who's actually run campaigns for a living quite successfully, you are better able to go find people who say, I like Donald Trump, and get them to turn out than you are to go find someone who says, I don't know who the candidates are for president. Is this the year Ronald Reagan's running? No. You're an idiot. I don't want you to turn out. You're bad for the electoral gene pool. Please stay home. You know the date for the election? The election is December 18th. You're going to go vote on December 18th. That's when you idiot, show up and vote. And by the way, that actually is the election day. That's the Electoral College Day. I think it's December 18th. Somewhere that week, December 17th, 18th, or 19th. You're not lying when you tell them the election for president is that day. And these idiots, if they're that undecided and they don't even know who's running for office, I mean, that's it. Listen, now this is not to bemoan newer voters. I have some friends who've never voted before. And after the first Trump assassination attempt, they decided, I got to go vote. I got to go vote for this guy. They clearly want to stop him. I got to go vote for him. And they figured out how to get registered to vote. And they're going to go vote for him. But I do know some people who are so not in tune with politics. And I realize if you're listening to this program, you probably can't even wrap your mind around it. But there actually are people in this country right now, a very small percentage, but they exist. They don't even know who's running for president. They don't care. And they believe that it doesn't matter, Democrat or Republican, they're all the same. Nothing's going to change. And in that regard, they're actually kind of right, more than you and me, because, I mean, some things do change, but very rarely does a whole lot change based on the presidential election. But they are not engaged at all, and they're not going to go vote. It is far better for a presidential candidate to focus on turning out their base at this point than to try to find a small pool of undecided voters who don't even know who's running for office.